So our question last week was one on a topic we don't actually come across a lot, but it's a really important topic. Why are you the gender you identify with? So if you see yourself as male, why is that? Is it just because you look male? Is it because you were brought up male? What's going on there?
So our first response is from a contributor that sometimes posts stuff to us on Twitter, Caffeine. He says, "It's a tricky question. On the surface, it seems just a question of definition. I have anatomy and personality traits that society calls male, and I have no reason to disagree with that description. So therefore, I identify as male. But, as asked on the podcast, my brain feels male, but what if my brain was somehow taken out and put into a female body? Would I still feel male, or would that change? I don't know. Physiologically, there are a lot of things going on. I take cues from anatomy, I take cues from society based on how I act. I have parts of my brain that are developed certain ways because of hormones my body produced during gestation and puberty, and I have hormones currently in my body that affect my moods and emotions. I guess if I were suddenly thrown into the body of someone else with very different anatomy and hormones that I'm used to, I'd be very confused and just identify as really messed up. For now, though, I just consider myself really lucky that by random chance I match stereotypical gender traits that I don't have to stress about the way many people do."
Okay, that's a fairly casual answer. That's something I would probably agree with. I just happen to be male because that's how my brain feels and how my body looks. Jessica says she's female because she was brought up that way due to her sex. In her mind, she feels fairly gender neutral. But there isn't much choice but to comply to the role if you want to be treated decently by people. And actually, we haven't really gone into the fact that though you can biologically look male and you can feel male, we haven't gone at all into like sexual preferences and things. And
I think it's a
separate issue. It's probably related.
It's related, but it's not necessarily related. So obviously you can be any gender and have any sexual preference. So obviously we know that being male or identifying as male doesn't mean that you like women because you can be gay. Or if you're female, you can also be gay. So gender doesn't dictate your sexuality, but I think gender and sexual preference are related in that you have to know you have to have some conception of gender in your sexual preference. So if you say I'm attracted to men, you have to sort of have a conception of what you mean by a man. So if someone, I find this a very interesting question.
It can all get very fuzzy.
I find it a very interesting question because say you're sexually attracted to men and then you see someone and they look like a man to you.
But then it turns out they're not.
And they say that they identify as a woman or they identify as female. Does that change your attraction to them?
Are you attracted to them on the inside or the outside?
But I'm more interested in what is that inside? How does someone's identity, internal identity, change how they behave? Like some people can... there's obviously stereotypical gender roles of male and female, and there's stereotypical societally dictated like ways that men are supposed to behave and women are supposed to behave. It's very traditional. Obviously, in our modern society, people don't abide to those, or at least most people don't. So it sort of blurs the lines what is male and what is female in terms of behavior, even physical characteristics. In the past, women wore dresses and had long flowing hair. Now there's a lot of women around that have short hair and wear
pants.
Stereotypically male clothing. Strangely, you don't get very many men sort of reversing that trend.
Fight the power. We got to bring back the skirt.
I find it very fascinating on a societal level.
I think pants are a little more practical.
I guess they are.
Especially in Melbourne.
It's just interesting that that's the way society is, that women can imitate men, but men can't imitate women without ridicule.
That is true. And I think that's a whole other slew of issues that
it's really complicated and we really can't touch all of them, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Totally. We've got Josh who says that a similar thing. He identifies as male, he looks male, he's got all the male chromosomes and so forth, and he feels fortunate that he doesn't have an internal conflict between his sex and his gender. Sex being your biologically assigned.
Yeah, it's tricky. We might as well just
your
go
gender
with
being
that.
like what you identify with.
As a biologist, I get where people come from when they talk about
it gets a little
biological
fuzzier.
sex, but there are complications there as well, and I don't know, it's tricky. Yeah.
And Michelle says most days she just kind of feels like her own person, but when it comes to sex stuff, she doesn't really feel like it has anything to do with her gender.
Like we said before, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a few people have talked about sort of nature and nurture. Josh has said he believes it's both nature and nurture. I personally think that most of this stuff is nature. Like, obviously, what you biologically are is nature. Like, you can't decide your chromosomes. That's not society's call. Also, I think your sexual preference isn't something that depends on your upbringing. It's the sort of like the whole, is your sexual preference a choice? I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that it doesn't appear to be.
Well, I know there's definitely genetic links with sexual preference.
Yeah.
So they can trace like homosexuality throughout family trees and stuff. But they've also found sort of environmental factors as well. So if you have a lot of brothers, you're more likely to be gay.
Yeah, as an upbringing kind of thing?
So yeah, it's possibly like
or is that a
societal
hormonal thing?
Yeah, or it could be an epigenetic hormonal thing. So if you've got two older brothers and then you come along and you're male, you're more likely to be gay statistically.
Okay.
And there's some reason for that. I don't know if it's biological or the way you're brought up. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But it doesn't look like that is being forced by your genetics, because being born third doesn't genetically really impact you.
Probably is an epigenetic thing. That's what I'm inclined to say.
And I just think it's when we get to these neurological, like, these are psychological phenomena. So psychological phenomena are encoded by the brain.
Though?
Yeah, so it's about your behavior and your preferences, the way you think about things. It is a psychological phenomenon.
I guess so, okay.
So psychological phenomena are, if we sort of assume, and I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast would assume, that it's all dictated by your brain. So your brain is dependent on stimuli from the environment, but it also is on some level genetically encoded. Like it's developed through a developmental process.
Genetically, hormonally, all of that.
So I think for a lot of behaviors, you can be sort of genetically pushed down a certain path, and then the environment takes over and sort of shapes how that is expressed.
Sure.
And there's a lot of complex traits, like we were talking about height previously on the show, where you can have all the genes for height, but if you're malnourished as a child, you won't grow to the height that you could have grown. That's just it's a very one-dimensional example. But with behaviors and preferences, like the sort of food you like, I think maybe that's potentially partially genetically coded. We know that certain people genetically don't like the taste of certain foods, but your taste for food, what foods you like to eat, what foods you don't like to eat, is a product of your upbringing, what environment you've grown up in, what foods you've eaten as a child, stuff like that, and psychological associations you have with certain types of food. I think sexual preference and potentially how you see gender and how you see yourself could be encoded in sort of in environmental sort of stimuli sort of thing.
I feel like I would disagree with you a little bit. I'd say that that's almost entirely sort of effectively decided at birth. Like, you hear stories of people who their parents have sort of figured out that they're gay by the time they're 4, long before they hit puberty or have any interest in any of that kind of thing. It's sort of, and like...
But I'd be curious to know why the parents think the child is gay at 4. Obviously, the child isn't saying that they're attracted to
I guess
men or women at that point.
They'd be assuming they're portraying stereotypical gay characteristics. But I think you've got to wonder if that is a stereotype.
Yeah, if you have a complex trait like this, obviously someone could have, let's assume that there's like a multitude of genes that if you have certain variants all align, then you're going to be gay, or if you have them align, you're going to be straight. Certain people might grow up in an environment that's conducive to that genetic sort of basis. So they could be, I don't know, if there are sort of behavioral stereotypes that are actually accurate for people of different sexualities, I don't know if that's actually true.
That's a good point.
But let's just say there is for some reason. You could have a child that has all of their cards sort of come up gay, I guess, genetically, and then they grow up in an environment where they will also be pushed towards gay. Then they will.
But what about the places where
where
being gay is? And I said before I really didn't want to get into sexual preference stuff, but we're here now.
I don't know why we're talking about it, but let's talk about it.
What about in the environments where it's incredibly unacceptable to be gay, like really, really fundamental religious communities, pretty much like hell, even our own country and like other Western countries before not so long ago, where being gay was really, really bad.
Yeah.
And it was often illegal or ridiculously unacceptable. Hell, in a lot of countries right now, being gay still brings penalties of death and stuff. I guess, and I have really no real background on the topic, but I'm not sure how that could be an environment that would encourage that kind of thing.
I'm not necessarily saying that it's like a psychological conscious a choice sort of thing. Like, oh, I see that there's a gay couple next door. They're gay, therefore I think that behavior is more, I don't know, not necessarily acceptable, but just that's an option for me. That's potentially a cause. But you can have, obviously there's a genetic component there as well.
Yeah.
So in an environment where you're not getting any of those social cues or social changing of the brain and how it's developing and how behaviors are developing psychologically,
so you're
still going to get gay people. So you obviously you do get gay people in societies where being gay is unacceptable.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. Like Alan Turing, the famous computer scientist in World War II, very unacceptable that he was gay, but he was gay and he was chemically castrated for that, unfortunately. So yeah, you can have a problematic behavior or preference in an environment where that's not actually acceptable.
Yeah,
definitely.
All right. Neither of us have enough information here. I certainly don't.
The reason we asked this question about gender, and I guess we moved on to sex.
We did, didn't we?
But the reason I wanted to ask it is because it just gets you thinking about the contribution of, I don't know, biology and social environment and, I don't know, other types of environmental influences
and it's
on a sort of psychological, very personal thing. And I think a lot of people would benefit, or just society in general would benefit from thinking about this sort of thing. What has shaped the way that I see the world? It's a very intrinsic part of skepticism, I think, to look at why you think the way you think. If you can't justify the reasons for why you think something, then maybe you aren't justified in thinking it in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think in society today, it's still even a more controversial topic. Like homosexuality is quite accepted now. It's a much more controversial topic, the sort of like gender identity.
Definitely.
Who you're attracted to, people are generally okay with nowadays, you being attracted to anybody. But who you identify with is still slightly more of a thorny issue.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think you're just lucky if you happen to identify with what you appear to be. Whereas being a trans person, and I don't know too much about the topic, so I'm not going to go into it too much, must still be a very difficult thing. But it
definitely is.
It's definitely an interesting thing when you have that sort of mismatch between identity and biological, your personal psychological identity and your biological identity.